Billy was a goat-like monster hiding in the human world. Before heading out each day, he had a ritual. He would eat a live frog. Then, he'd go to a bar to pick out his victim for the night. Whenever he placed his hand near a target, he'd release a strange kind of energy. Any woman who came into contact with it would instantly become hopelessly devoted to him. Then, Billy would lock the women in the basement of his house, forcing them to bear his offspring. Every time he left the basement, he would open a valve, releasing a sedative gas to keep the women in their cages quiet and docile. But this time, the gas ran out. Faith managed to smash a window and escape, but she seemed to be trapped in a hallucination, seeing terrifying monsters chasing her from all sides. Panicked, she ran frantically across a bridge. Just then, a car came speeding out of nowhere, hitting her and throwing her to the ground. As Kent got out to check on Faith, Billy suddenly appeared behind him, urging him to call the police immediately. While Kent was back in his car making the call on his cell phone, Billy placed his hand on Faith's face, releasing that special energy again. The terrified Faith instantly calmed down, looking up at Billy with adoring eyes. But then Billy covered her mouth and nose, trying to smother her. Soon, Faith lost consciousness, dying at the hands of the monster, Billy. By the time Kent finished his call, Billy had vanished. Not long after, the police arrived and cordoned off the scene. But one thing struck Detective Nick as odd: Kent's headlight wasn't broken. Yet Faith's arm had injuries consistent with being cut by glass. His years of experience told Nick this was no simple accident. And sure enough, after questioning Kent, they learned there was another person at the scene, a man in a black suit. Kent had been too focused on Faith to get a good look at him, or even ask his name, so he couldn't provide the police with much more information. The medical examiner confirmed Faith's cause of death was suffocation, not the hit and run. Meanwhile, Detective Hank dug up Faith's background, discovering her husband Roy had a history of domestic violence. That immediately made Roy the prime suspect. But when Nick and Hank found Roy, he had been working overtime all night and didn't even know his wife was dead. His alibi checked out with a coworker, so he was cleared of suspicion. After that, Nick and Hank checked Faith's social media. They found a set of photos she had posted just the day before, showing what looked like the inside of a private courtyard. Using the address tagged in the photos, they tracked it down to a private bed and breakfast. As it turned out, the owner of this B&B was Billy. To everyone who knew him, Billy was just a friendly and welcoming host. His place was popular, and guests genuinely liked him. When Nick and Hank stated their purpose, Billy admitted that Faith had come by to see a room the previous night but had left without staying. After that, he enthusiastically gave them a tour of the courtyard, which was indeed the spot where Faith had taken her pictures. The whole place was beautifully landscaped and quite picturesque. But during the tour, Hank accidentally stepped on a frog that was on the ground. Billy immediately looked devastated. He quickly crouched down to pick up the injured frog. At that moment, his anger caused him to momentarily transform into his goat monster visage. Although ordinary people couldn't see his monstrous form, Nick, being a Grimm who could see through any monster's disguise, could. But since Hank was right there, Nick didn't let on. He simply handed Billy his card and asked him to get in touch if he remembered anything else about Faith. However, after Nick and Hank left, Billy took the frog he had just picked up and swallowed it whole and raw, as if this was how his kind obtained their mysterious energy. When Nick got home, he went straight to his trailer to consult the old books left to him by his aunt. There it was, a clear entry on Billy's kind, a goat monster known as a Bluebeard. Strangely, the book said that wherever a goat monster went, he was always surrounded by beautiful women, but it didn't explain why. So Nick went to see his werewolf friend, Eddie, to ask him for more details about goat monsters. Eddie told Nick that goat monsters were the horniest monster race out there. After they eat a frog, their bodies release a special kind of energy called pheromones. Any woman who gets even a whiff of these pheromones, even a nun who'd spent decades in a convent, would instantly fall head over heels for him. After leaving Eddie's place, Nick immediately started digging into Billy's background. But all he could find was that Billy had moved to Portland a year ago and bought the B&B. Before that, there was no record of Billy's life at all, as if he had changed his name and was deliberately hiding his past. They also pulled up another set of files. There had been 17 missing women cases across the region in recent years. But there was a catch. Although all the women were eventually found, they had all turned up pregnant, and DNA tests showed the children all had the same father. Nick suspected Billy had captured Faith, and when she escaped, he killed her to keep her quiet. But without solid evidence, Captain Sean could only tell them to keep investigating. So, Nick decided they should split up. He would tail Billy, while Hank would take the opportunity to sneak into the B&B and search the place. Nick followed Billy through several streets until Billy stopped under a secluded tree, took out a frog and swallowed it whole. Once he'd replenished his energy, Billy confidently revealed his true form. Although ordinary people naturally couldn't see his monstrous appearance, Nick, watching from a distance, could see it all clearly. Finally, Billy turned and headed into a bar nearby, ready to pick out his target for the night. Since Billy had already met Nick and might recognize him, Nick didn't want to tip him off. Instead, he called Eddie and asked him to go into the bar and keep an eye on Billy. As soon as Eddie entered the bar, he immediately picked up the scent of the goat monster. He also spotted Billy's intended target for the night, a woman named Jocelyn. Eddie deliberately sat down close to them. He had to admit, Billy's flirting skills were impressive. Even he, sitting nearby, found himself completely drawn in. Just then, Billy deliberately moved his hand close to Jocelyn and released a burst of pheromones. Her eyes instantly became dazed with infatuation. At that point, she probably wouldn't hesitate to die for him if he asked. Eddie left the bar and told Nick that Billy had already caught his prey and that the victim would soon come to him willingly. Right after that, Billy walked out of the bar, wanting to get back to the B&B early to wait for Jocelyn. Nick said goodbye to Eddie and immediately followed him. Meanwhile, Hank was uncovering Billy's secret inside the B&B. As he entered the basement, he suddenly felt dizzy. Within just a few seconds, he started hallucinating and collapsed to the floor. However, just before losing consciousness, he spotted the women Billy had locked in cages. Not long after, Billy returned to the B&B. A car pulled up to the curb, and the woman getting out was none other than Jocelyn. But as soon as Jocelyn stepped inside, Nick barged in, demanding to speak with her privately, citing police business. Though a bit reluctant, Jocelyn followed Nick outside. Nick then told her she was interfering with an investigation and sent her away from the B&B. Immediately after, Nick called Hank's phone inside the B&B, and sure enough, he heard it ringing. Following the sound, he went down to the basement and found Hank collapsed on the floor, along with several women locked in cages. Just then, Billy suddenly locked the basement door and turned on the gas valve, buying himself time to escape. As Billy rushed out, he nearly ran into Jocelyn. It was clear she was completely mesmerized by him and intended to leave with him. Billy was more than willing, so he hurriedly took her and left the B&B. Back in the basement, Nick and Hank had to put their weight together to break the door down. They quickly shut off the gas. When the police arrived on the scene soon after, all the women trapped in the basement were rescued. Now the top priority was to catch the fleeing Billy. Luckily, Hank had earlier placed a tracker on Billy's car, so they could monitor his route at any time. Before long, Billy was showing Jocelyn a scenic view when Nick and Hank found them. In a panic, Billy immediately abandoned Jocelyn and fled for his life. Nick and Hank chased after him, but they couldn't keep up because goat monsters are naturally skilled climbers. Using his advantage, Billy quickly shook them off, but in his haste, as he crossed a street, he was hit by a car. Billy wasn't killed, but he was badly injured. It seemed justice would finally catch up with him. But just as Nick and Hank thought the case was closed, Billy released his pheromones on a paramedic.